faces everyone, CI can emerge, not necessarily alone, but perhaps as part of a team which has a variety of subject matter experts associated with it. And I know this is a phrase that's been overused, but a single source of truth. But what's missing often now, what you see in the press is various opinions offered by those that aren't qualified to offer them about the state of the situation, etc., because of the panic that Ellen referred to. And I'm involved right now in a project that I started about 10 days ago with a team involving an epidemiologist. I represent the pharmaceutical industry, a market researcher, a public affairs person, a social networking expert, etc. And I really can't talk about the details because we haven't released the first phase of our work, but it'll be coming out this week. And really one of the first conclusions we've come to is that the way to look at this is that for strategic planners, which is generally our customer, there are those that are interested in the micro environment where they have to make decisions every day and they have to make them quickly. And there are those that are already planning for when we're on the other side of this and what the permanent changes are going to be. I think if you bucketed your recommendations to those two different groups in a way that meets their unique needs, what do we need today, what do we need tomorrow, as opposed to, let's assume that this goes through cycles or it's seasonal and it's behind us in a year. The questions will then be, what are the permanent changes that will come to the way business is done, et cetera. And understand that where there's always been a debate over strategic versus tactical planning in CI, in a circumstance like this, you have to do both. And you have to do both simultaneously. It's important to understand which customers fit into which bucket and make sure that meeting their needs as time progresses. It's funny, I've been in this industry for about 40 years, maybe a little longer than that, and I've never seen anything like it. And I've been in infectious disease, and I've been involved in launching drugs that have had a role in AIDS and a variety of other situations. And I can tell you that this is different. And we'll be looking back at how this is handled probably in the Harvard Business Review case 20 years from now, 30 years from now, where we went wrong, how we could do it better, and how the planning for the next one, and there will be this one, regardless of what we do in this situation, can be handled better with better preparation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cliff. That was very helpful, and I think you've also helped to help encapsulate much of what we've been talking about. I think that as we've been dealing with trying to understand what's going on in the present, trying to develop that situational awareness, but I think a lot of organizations too are trying to understand what is to come. And so trying to maintain that balance between the two is very tricky because none of us have really been in a situation in which both of them, we're in a very, very highly pressured environment in which both of these have become priorities, and so I think it's important that we that we pull together our toolkits actually, and I think and I'd like the team's thoughts about reinventorying very quickly, of course, because this is not a time for exercises. And being ruthless about the types of intelligence techniques that are useful and not useful right now, towards actionability, but also, towards greater foresight to understand what all the various signals and indicators that we're seeing are pointing us towards so that we can be better prepared even in 3 months and 6 months, depending on, the various projections that are out there. So, and I do want to point out too that Jim Miller had mentioned disinformation, being a piece of this too. And so, we're hit with a lot of noise. and trying to understand the signals to noise, can get very, very difficult in a time like this. It was already getting difficult with misinformation and disinformation, and now we've got all of this coming along, and some of it is orchestrated, right? It's meant to obfuscate and or worse. And so trying to create something where you can do rapid research and analysis, rapid RNA, it's iterative, rapid scenarios, readjustments, looking at the various issues, identifying key issues, combining that with early warning. It seems to me that there needs to be internally more of a seamless process within organizations. How can we achieve this as quickly as possible? Any thoughts about that? Understanding there's no silver bullet. Oh, I think we might have frozen here. Let's see. All right. Nope. Okay. Here we are. I think we're unfrozen now. And any thoughts about this? About how we might be able to work with within our organizations, to pull together the resources that we need at this point to manage the influx, the potential information intel overload, manage disinformation, and just apply the tools that we need. What types of tools are we using right now? And I do notice that there have been a few suggestions already in our chat box here on some of the tools. So I do want to point folks to that so that we're not repeating ourselves as things are moving very quickly in this. Any thoughts? And so Justin asked a clarifying question. Cynthia, so are you suggesting that CI acts as a fact checker? No, but what's important, because we can't get in the business of that. That's the weeds. But we need to understand which are the most reliable sources right now. And also, Jim had brought up disinformation, and actually it's one of the areas that I work on. With disinformation, what I'm finding is that the methods of triangulation, validation isn't working anymore. Because a lot of the disinformation agents in particular, not the misinformation folks, because that's more organic, the disinformation folks, depending on what their intentions are actually using the information and intelligence life cycle, to undermine the traditional methods of validation. So what they're doing is they're basically taking a blanket approach and putting a lot of information out there. So you're actually triangulating to other disinformation points. So how do we manage that, right? Because the last thing we want to do is be able to introduce that into our own organization and use bad intel, right? So are people seeing that, and how are you managing it? So that's what I was getting at, Justin. Victoria also says, Cynthia, how do we realistically spend time on forward-looking, more than 1 year, analysis in the middle of a crisis when action is what will keep us employed? It's hard to do both or justify spending it and additional time on strategic initiatives that don't have direct tactical impacts. That is an excellent question. So, any thoughts? I have thoughts to this too, but I think I've spoken enough in the past couple of minutes. So I see other folks nodding their heads. How do we balance that need and that saliency, right? And the biases actually that our own users have towards the immediate at the expense of the future, which is how we got here in the first place. Any thoughts?
One of the things, Cynthia, that may apply at a time like this, and I've actually seen it apply in the past couple of weeks in the pharmaceutical industry, is that the network that you work with to gather information and validate it should not be limited to your own company. Not only should it not be limited to your own company, but I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. It should include what you have traditionally viewed as your competitors. If your competitors are doing the same thing you're doing, in terms of gathering information and attempting to validate it, you'll find that the CEOs of these companies are above the fray when it comes to putting that competitive mindset aside and saying we're all in this together. Within the past week or so, 17 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world have created a consortium where all of the information that's being shared is being funneled to one place.
Excellent.
And it's not only information about environment and the pace of change, etc. But scientific information, which has traditionally been patent protected and has been a source of competitive advantage. So it wouldn't be, and I don't know whether other industries would actually want to do this or not, perhaps in, advanced technology industries, etc. But in an industry like mine, which depends so heavily on patents as a source of differentiation among your colleagues for your products and services, to give that up, and on top of that, to suggest that you'll contribute to the effort pro bono, without fees, without money, without a sense of absolutely needing a profit forward, is highly unusual and doesn't happen that often. When it does, it's very powerful.
Thank you, Cliff. And I've been reading about that, and I think that that is one of the solutions, right? Towards using the collective, right, to help understand what information and intel, are good, what valid, useful, to the group, and to the question of whether or not this is lasting is another question. But for the time being, this is what we have, and this could be also a model that could be that could translate to other industries as well. And I would urge people as Intel practitioners, we don't necessarily wait for other people to create this, right? Because I know that you had just said, I asked Cliff, whether or not, this we would see this in other sectors, but well, why not, create it for our own? Right, and so that's something to really think about. So we want to talk about actionability. We could also make it actionable in this sense. So thank you for that. And any other thoughts among fellows and the audience members? I have to admit, I'm furiously trying to keep up with the conversation on the chat as well. And there's so many different directions in which we can go with this. But I will say that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this the webinar, we're just starting out in exploring these questions, and so we'll have other opportunities to revisit this along the way, throughout this life cycle of this particular event, and in the end, we'll want to conduct a lessons learned, a more robust lessons learned, along with others like probably the Harvard Business Review and so forth. But so we'll have opportunities to go through some of the points you're mentioning in your chat, and perhaps translate that into a future webinar or other event as well. So keep them coming, because I know that the opportunities discussion is a wonderful one. I know that the customers one is wonderful too, and Victoria, I know you've been really key in keeping that those points going here. So I appreciate that very much, and your point about service firms being very customer focused. I would say that that's a wonderful way of being able to borrow from best practices in other sectors right now, and adapt that. Another thing too is that somebody had mentioned, actually Richard Caldwell had mentioned that your sector, which is you're working in the defense and aerospace. You're now producing equipment, to fight this pandemic, and so I really appreciate your sharing that, and I'm glad to hear it, of course, as a global citizen. And you mentioned that this is actually a good thing because it's really means that your organization will become more agile, and so I love that some of us are really seeing the silver lining in this. And we're already being able to derive lessons. So with that, I'm going to take a step back and see if anybody else has anything to add. No?
Cynthia, can I add a comment?
Yes. Is that Jonathan Kaloff?
Jonathan, yes. I've actually put my video on in my recluse. I'm an academic, so I'm not capable of short words. But I got to start off by saying, when I was at the CI Fellows Conference in November, December, I was impressed with what we call the menschiness of the group. Extraordinary bunch of people. And so that's going to really tag into what I see as an interesting opportunity for the CI Fellows and the positioning of the field. People are going to remember who provided the help. People are going to remember the networks that provided assistance. And this group is uniquely qualified to do that and help to position CI. So I'm going to give you two things right immediately. that for you to think about in terms of getting us going. One is, I've been doing a lot of stuff on open intelligence and sharing information, and we've already heard about that. We should now, whether we're competitors, whether we're customers, look at how our CI network as a whole can assist companies riding through this. Craig mentioned some ideas in terms of where to go for help. I'm just thinking about what a great opportunity to find opportunities for our organizations, find valuable information, and show our leaders what this network can do for them in a time of crisis. Number two, and this ties into an email I received, I'm sure we're all getting them. One of my ex-students emailed me and said, I got a problem. I've got access to personal protective equipment in China, and I've got ventilators, and I'm having a hard time getting this to market because people don't trust who I am and who the organization is. We have a global network of CI professionals who should be able to relatively quickly background check any of these people and get life-saving equipment into the hands that matter. And maybe if the CI fellows are seen at the center of that, once again, we're going to be remembered. We have a great network. You know, Cynthia, you've done a great job with how you've run this to ensure that it continues to be that group of mentors. And so there's my challenge to the group. And Craig, I'm glad you're shaking your head up and down. It means I'm not totally in left field.
No. I appreciate this, and Jonathan's also mentioning the CI Fellows. We have an annual meeting in the fall where we get together and really think about some of the bigger issues at hand, and so yes, absolutely, this is on our radar, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing this, Jonathan. We really want to hear what people are thinking and what they need, but I do appreciate you are broadening this beyond just the intelligence community's needs, towards needs elsewhere, because many of our skills are transferable. And so this is where, and I think this touches on Victoria's earlier question too about, how do we demonstrate, our needs, to more salient, our capabilities to more salient problems to remain employed, versus, the future. And so I think that, an important thing is that, to Jonathan's point, yes, we will be looking at all of these various opportunities, and so in our ongoing monthly meetings, we'll be talking about these, and to these broader questions about balancing what it is that we need to do as Intel folks, to the situational awareness and immediate decision making and actionability versus early morning and future scenario, future states, is that it's our jobs to remind our customers that a lot of this actually had been foreseen. We started out with a screenshot of the Bill Gates video, and so quite frankly, and I'll just be blunt about this because I'm not in front of any one of your clients or your internal customers, but we got here because we succumbed to our own biases, right? For immediacy, and perhaps other types of biases like the ostrich effect. There could be biases like recency bias and optimism bias and so forth, right? So we need to be mindful of the type of biases that are in place, identify those, and work on them individually and collectively, because that's what has basically nipped us in the butt, to say the very least on this. And so so it's important for us to champion within our own organizations, the importance of the future work that we have to do. And it doesn't have to even be, blue skies or even any kind of, looking too far out in a cone of uncertainty. Right now, the future is 6 months, it's a year. And so I think to be able to balance what we're doing, in terms of our situational awareness, with some foresight, that is nearer term, is very important. And we need to actually champion that to help point people out to potential lost opportunities or even potential threats. If we don't try to understand how this virus and its effects are going to be impacting our customers in a year, in 6 months, we're constantly chasing the situation instead of getting ahead of it. And so that's one very serious conversation I think we can have with our own internal customers, because our jobs as Intel Pro is not to be reactive and not to to respond to requests. It's also to lead. And sometimes in organizations, you may not be able to just change into a leadership mode right away, but begin raising questions and shifting perspectives so that you can play a greater leadership role. So in that, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I'm going to open this up to my colleagues and to you guys for some thoughts.
Hey, Cynthia, can you hear me now?
I can hear you great, Derek.
Okay. Sorry about that. My Apple earbuds were fail-safe till just then.
Sorry.
Number one, I'm sorry I was late. I was on a call with a client talking about, in essence, it was relating to project timelines in this new environment that we operate in, right? And what might have been a 6-week project before, you're buffering those timelines in a sense to allow some extra time in that capacity chain. It's a different way of thinking about supply chain, but our firm does a fair bit of work in both the research as well as a software point of view. And we're having to find ways to retool toward, number one, elongating those project calendars at times, in this new normal or next normal. I'm not going to say it's the normal, but it's the next version of normal that we're all becoming accustomed to. And then also, the virtual element. I think a number of the comments, I believe it was Justin, who talked about, number one, I'm going to kind of build on something that Jonathan talked about here a moment ago. Brands, and I believe it was Mark Cuban that talked about this recently. Brands are going to be remembered for what they do right now, both for their customers as well as, I argue more importantly, for their employees, their staff. You're either going to make or break a sense of loyalty with your staff over the coming weeks and months. And to Victoria's point, also that I'm seeing here, just trying to stay current in the chat window.
Yeah.
Intel and insights professionals, we have to be able to play both sides of the strategic and tactical. And I'm a huge fan of tactical. If you can't be relevant in the here and now, to our dear old dad, mine, Eric's dear old dad used to say, nothing happens until you sell something to someone. I use that a lot internally. If you don't sell anything to anybody, ultimately everybody's job is going to be irrelevant eventually, right? And that has a lot to do with product innovation, disruption, all of those things included. But we're having to figure out how to retool, and fortunately we have a little bit of a head start because we're a remote workforce to be.
I just lost Derek. I'm not sure if everyone else is picking this up too. If you can hear us, Derek, you may need to rewind yourself a little bit when we can hear you again.
Yeah, you're not alone there, Cynthia. I couldn't hear Derek either.
Sorry. Yeah, I know that a lot of folks have been having some hiccups with the various teleconferencing products.
Oh yes.
So yeah, we just lost Derek there. All right, so we'll just bookmark that, and hopefully he can rejoin us. But I do appreciate where he was taking us with that as well. So hopefully he can come back to it.
I'm back now, Cynthia. Sorry.
Excellent. Great.
I'm going to say maybe it has something to do with my 4 kids being on whichever devices they're out in.
That too.
That's another huge component. I counseled this client that I was on the phone with that kept me from joining on time. I said, hey, do the best you can. Nobody's going to beat you up, especially now, for having a child scream in the background or walk in on you on a meeting or lose your internet connection because the internet bandwidths are being just so overloaded these days. So I'm going to assume everybody is going to provide their colleagues, internal and external, a little more grace than maybe they did before.
Yeah, I think so.
What I'll finish by saying is, this morning I'm an investment guy, at my core. Before I got into CI 17 years ago, I was working for an asset management firm, and I am a risk-seeking, almost 46-year-old CEO of a professional services firm that got started 2.5 decades ago. But I look for opportunities to apply pressure points to well thought out opportunities. And there's an old saying in the investment world, you trim on strength and you add on weakness. And that is, I don't know that anybody could have predicted that the stock market would pull back 25+%. But you had to assume that eventually it's been talked about for a long time now that a recessionary period was going to occur. So, if you weren't rebalancing your portfolios, personal, professional, if you're in that space, you should have been, and you should have had some foresight to be able to say, hey, at nearly 30K on the Dow, this would have been a good opportunity to rebalance a little bit. Now, I'm going to assume a lot of folks probably have the foresight to do that, or at least have a little cash on the sidelines to be able to apply and do, as we say, add on weakness, right? But it's going to get probably tougher out there before it gets better. And I was listening to CNBC while on the rowing machine this morning. The CEO for Restaurant Brands International, they've got Tim Hortons, Burger King, and Popeyes was on. And all he focused on was safety of his clientele. You want to know that the supply chain of the chicken sandwich, when you go through the Burger King drive-up, the supply chain of that chicken sandwich content is coming from a safe place, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was important. And the safety and security of his employees was the, like 1A and 1B. And I thought that was really kind of supportive of what many have been talking about. Take care of your employees, your staff, take care of your customers. Treat them in a way that you probably aren't typically used to. I spend a lot of my time texting our top clients, asking them how their families are coping with at-home school, asking them how they're coping with if they have a spouse also working from home, or they're maybe two parents are working from home while their kids are going to school. I'm checking in on those types of topics right now. I'm not asking them, hey, remember that project we talked about doing, next week?
Right.
That's kind of, I think it's kind of borderline irresponsible to be asking those other types of questions right now. And, in time, those questions will come up once we get to that next normal. Anyway, that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And great, we're asking those questions among ourselves, but we're not pushing those out to people unless, right, they're coming to us very often. I'm seeing that right now. There's a bit of a grace period. And you had mentioned the strategic and tactical. And Guy Neri, excuse me if I pronounced your name wrong, has mentioned in our Q&A box, we're dealing with a situation that the unknown is greater than the known. The way China managed the event so far is not necessarily the way we can or should do. I would recommend focusing more on tactics rather than strategic. And you have to reevaluate our strategy when we will have more clarity. What do you think? So how about some of the strategy folks who are here? Thoughts on that? And I think that will probably be our last question in looking at the time. So anything to add to Guy's question? I think we've seen indicators already, from some of the responses that we are focused on the doing, versus the sort of longer view, and so that is true. We say that there's consensus here among the group. Yeah.
Definitely consensus. Yeah, I mean, I think more broadly, you sort of got to take some of the emotion out of today, right? And focusing on things in a more rational manner. And I know it's not always within everybody's gift to do that, as Derek was saying, but I think, being able to, empathize, back to, the leadership traits of, action, determination, vision, integrity, communication, and empathy. I mean, the empathy is there, right, in spades relative to what Derek was saying, and I do exactly the same for my team. It isn't about understanding where we are with deadlines. It's more to do with how coping and have you been out for your daily walk. But certainly being able to show that level of integrity by taking what is increasingly an element of emotion out of it, and perhaps I'm speaking from a naive position because I haven't got employees dependent on me from a P&L perspective, and I'm just a small cog in a big machine. But at the end of the day, I think anything that demonstrates leadership through those traits: action, determination, vision, integrity, communication, empathy, gets my vote every time.
Thank you. It's a wonderful way to sum this up, Andrew, and eloquent as usual. And so as we look forward, I want us to consider, thinking about questions that we are asking and what we should be asking along the way. As we touched on, this is iterative, and we're learning as we go. And just as we're still professionals with a toolkit and experience and so forth. We need to be trained on where we should be looking, what we're doing, and need to do that actionability, and paying attention to the changes in practice and tools. And we will loop back to talk about this. We'll be talking about each of these various elements along the way, however long this lasts. But when this is over, we will also be conducting a retrospective as a group. So I do look forward to that in more ways than one. I think as you all will agree. And in the meantime, we hope that on behalf of the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows, I hope that you, our intelligence community colleagues, will remain healthy and positive and safe through this. And please keep in touch, because as Jonathan Kaloff has mentioned, and others as well, this is a time where we really need to be connecting more, sharing more. Cliff has mentioned that the pharma community has actually created a network to really to handle this, and maybe I don't know if the clearinghouse is the right word, but let's think about doing something the same for not just CI but also for the various industries that you represent and that you're in. So again, this is not a goodbye, but I do thank you all for sharing, and so we will be taking the comments, the very robust set of comments that you have shared. If I have missed any questions, I apologize. And we'll address that in our LinkedIn group. But look out for the link to this recording, and please, if you'd like to stay in touch, email for the that email address, acme@cifellows.com, for our newsletter, so you can stay in the loop about our next webinar, and that is April 29th. We'll announce the topic, and we'll also, as I mentioned, recordings will be available on our CI Fellows websites there. We also have a Twitter presence as well, so check out our tweets and join our LinkedIn community group so we can continue this conversation. So thank you all for participating. I want to thank the terrific ideas and just as importantly, the camaraderie. And one of the things that I think is very special about the Council is that of CI Fellows is that we're bringing people together, not just to share ideas, but to share support. And at a time like this, it's tremendously important. Competition is a part of what we pay attention to, but it's not what we're about. And so, I do thank you very much, for being a part of this community and for helping us, share this message as well, and to improve our practices along the way. So with this, we will wind down, and I'm going to stop the recording now. And but feel free to stick around and chat a little bit if you like. Thank you very much.